So you saw, the ordinary will be considered extraordinary. Idiocracy.
Think he looks better than President Trump? Or? I think the camera's on again. I switched batteries until I found a combination that might work. So the obvious slippery slope argument that leads to Idiocracy, the movie, is that the more intelligent people have fewer children. And by the way, that I don't think that's a thesis that's argued at all. In fact, one of the arguments that population is not increasing as fast as it had been even in third world countries is because as more women in those countries become educated, they have fewer children. So you know, there's clearly that. And by the way, Professor Thompson also talks about that as one of the reasons for the change. But the so the implication is that the smart folks don't have children, or not as many, and the non-smart folks do. I think that's the same thing that Goldie Hawn says. Remember Goldie Hawn? She's one of my favorites. Let's see what I have.
It's wonderful having you on the show. I always wanted to get to know you and find out what you're really like. Yeah, because whenever I watch you on television, you always tend to be so dumb. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not pretending. I really am dumb. Yeah, I am. You know, and what's more important, dumb is beautiful.
How being dumb?
That's right. I mean, now, did you ever tell me who are all the people that cause all the trouble in the world?
I give up who?
The smart people.
Smart people.
That's right. And who are the scientists and the statesmen and the generals who run all the government, make all the wars, and the dumb people? No, the smart people. Another question. Look at air pollution. I mean, who are the big cars and machines that cause all that?
You're smart
The
people.
smart people.
Yeah.
Yes. And what's the major problem confronting today, confronting our universities is the
Well, now you just waited and so long they told you. You can't blame that on smart people. I mean, dumb people have just as many babies. I know that. I don't know, but what can we dumb people do about this now?
This is the question we all have to stick together.
Yeah. Yeah. How do I
This is a national organization.
Organization? Why did you cheer up? The DDA?
Dum-dums up in there. I'm a member, by the way.
Well,
So when we think about the decline of the population, and I'm sure you're all aware of that, and the United States isn't, I think we're less than like 1.1 replacement in births, which is, you have to be over 2. In fact, I think replacement is 2.2 or something like that, right, per couple. Is it 1.9? So, but of course, what helps is immigration, The first couple of generations of immigrant families tend to have as many children as they would have in the third world country where they had come from, because they're enculturated still in the culture from where they came from. The idea, of course, is as they become enculturated in the United States culture, then they become, smarter. I got to be careful here, right? And then the women start having fewer children, right? So that's kind of intriguing. Where was I going to go? So of course, abortion is an issue associated. Well, it's not really just a Western issue. I remember reading a book many years ago, got me in trouble actually, but it was a homicide by not Daly. I'm getting it wrong. And Daly and Wilson. Let me see if I can remember how to spell it. Okay. So this was one of the early texts on evolutionary psychology. Martin Daly and Margot Wilson. And the study was primarily about parents killing their children. And what they statistically showed was that most women that kill their children kill their infant children. And most males that kill their children kill their teenage male children. So that's kind of interesting. This ties into the pheromone issue too, by the way, because the possibility there is that the males that kill their teenage male children, by the way, it's not like there's a real big problem with this. It's just when you look at the statistics of those that do this, right? The possibility that the males that are killing their male teenage children are actually killing children that are not biologically, genetically theirs. Because one of the things DNA has shown us is that women often have children that are not from their official spouse. So is that something that the male can sense subliminally, by the way? Because just as the possibility is there that the male senses that his spouse is pregnant with a horse, on the pill, basically, when she is pregnant with a child, can apparently, we humans can tell that it's your child. And that triggers a protective reaction in the male, so that they're much more protective of their spouse who's pregnant with their child. The question is, well, does that same reaction occur? Is it a cultural thing? My wife is pregnant, I want to protect her, or is it, I know that's my genetic material that's growing in her womb, right? What if it's someone else's, right? Can you tell that as well? But it would be subliminal. It's not like you have an app where you can check and see, oh, I'm angry because, whatever, right? So all of that, I think, is extremely difficult and subject to counter critiques by people that don't believe it, right? So there's all kinds of issues there. But when we look at Daly and Wilson's book, this was how many years ago was it? Seems like it was a long time, because I remember I was reading it. The one son that I mentioned who had fetal alcohol, was at Chugiak High School at the time, and he was, of course, having all sorts of difficulties. Remember, we had taken him to North Star, Charter North Star, and when we were there waiting for our interview with the psychiatrist, a child in the hallway had a screaming fit and was yelling and screaming and saying that he was going to kill himself. He wanted to kill himself, and there were 4 adults trying to restrain that child in that hallway. And we were just in the waiting room just off of where that was happening. And I remember the look in my son's eyes. It was just absolute, amazement at what was going on. And that very next week, we got a call from the teachers at Chugiak High School that he had threatened to kill himself. And so we had a big teachers meeting that he attended, by the way. There were like 14 people sitting around the table, all concerned about him. And I arrived reading this book, which folks looked at it, and my attitude was, well, he's just picked this up as a way of getting attention. He has really no plan on hurting himself. He just learned that he could get attention by doing this, and I explained what had just happened that week, and you get the idea, right? And they were all horrified, because as far as they were concerned, he's threatened to kill himself. That's the issue. But, okay, well, I have to quit because it's time, right? I didn't ask a quiz question. What's a good quiz question for this topic? What do you think a person is? Or is that one of my test questions? It's one of my test questions. I better not use that one then. What do you think about a fetus? Is a fetus a person? Is a fetus a person? And if you're curious, my own thinking on this is, of course, I agree with what the church tells me to believe, but at the same time, I would argue that it's the woman's right to decide what happens to her body. So if a woman decides to have an abortion, that's her business. Although I'm puzzled why anyone would want to kill their own child. So that, but I mean, that's not my business, so. But I think that's kind of a way of being okay with the church and okay with United States law and politically correct and uncomfortable no matter what, Pardon? Especially this New Year, my New Year's resolution was that I was going to be an extreme neutral. Extreme neutrality is my extreme neutrality. So we'll take sides to the extreme. If that's, I don't know how that would work, but that's my goal. Have a good weekend. Be safe. It's supposed to snow.